Let's look at 7.NS.3, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we're just matching these with these. But we need to solve these first. So unfortunately there's only 4 here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so we may need to do them all. Which kind of stinks, but that's okay. So let's look at A. We have 3 1/2 divided by 3/4. Well, 3 1/2. We have to change that to improper fractions. So 3 times 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7/2. And we're not going to divide, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So let's simplify here. Cross this out, becomes a 1. Cross that out, becomes a 2, because we can divide them both by 2. So this becomes 7 times 2 is 14/3. Drop the 14 in. 3 goes into 14 4 times. That's 12. Minus and get 2. We drag that up and it becomes 4 2/3. So A, oh good, we found one. A is 7. Or so 7 is A. Moving on to B. B is 4 3/4 times 3/4. This needs to be an improper fraction. So 4 times 4 is 16, plus 3 is 19/4 times 3/4. We need to do 19 times 3, and 19 times 3 is 57/16. Let's drop that in. And that, 57, and 16 goes into 57 3 times. 16 times 3 is 48, minus, and you get 9. So it becomes 3 9/16. 3 9/16, that is not any of our options, so B actually does not get used. Let's move on to C. Let's move on to C. C. So here we're subtracting 5 3/8 minus 1 7/16. When we're doing this, we need to get a common denominator. So this becomes, we need to multiply 3/8, both of them, by 2, because we want to get 16. So it becomes 5, and 3 times 2 is 6/16, minus 1 and 7/16. Here we need to borrow again. So we're going to borrow from the 5, it's going to become a 4. When we do that, we need to add 16 to the numerator, which makes that 22. These are the same thing, we just borrowed one from the whole number to make this 22, to make it big enough to subtract. And now we can subtract. So 42 minus 7 is 15/16, and 4 minus 1 is 3. So 3 and 15/16. Does that match any of our answers? Yes. C is 6. So 6 is C. So you want to put a C right there. And let's move on to D. Here we have subtraction and addition. Okay, so we need to get a common denominator, so that's 5 1/2 minus 3 7/8 plus 2 3/4. Common denominator. Here they're all different, but the least common multiple will be 8, so we're going to try to get all of these to 8. So let's do that. That becomes 5 4/8, because we have to multiply both of these by 4, minus 3 and 7/8 plus, now we need to multiply both of these by 2. And that is 2 and 6/8. So here, this is kind of a pain because we have to borrow. So this will become 4 and 12/8 so that we can do the correct subtraction. And we're just going to recopy this. So minus 3 and 7/8 plus 2 and 6/8. Now common denominators again, but now we can actually do the subtraction. And here we can do the numerators first. 12 minus 7 is 5 plus 6 is 11 over 8. And now we have 4 minus 3 is 1 plus 2 is 3. So 3 and 11 over 8. But the numerator is bigger, so we're going to increase that by 1. And left over is 3/8. So 4 and 3/8. Do we see a 4 and 3/8? Yes. Number 9. So 9 is D. 9 is D. Moving on to E. Two and 2/8 minus 1 and 3/8. Okay, so denominators are already the same, but 2 minus 3, we can't have that, at least in this situation, so we need to borrow. So this becomes 1, and we need to add 8. 1 and 10/8 minus 1 and 3/8. And we get 10 minus 3 is 7/8. 1 minus 1 is 0. So 7/8. That does not fit. So E is not an option. And the last one, F. We have to do the subtraction first, and they're already the same denominators, so that's nice. 10 and 1/2 minus 2 and 1/2. So let's do that first. Denominators are the same, that's nice. 1 minus 1, we can do that. So 1/2 minus 1/2 is nothing, so 10 and 1/2 minus 2 and 1/2 is 8. And we're going to multiply that by 3 and 1/2. So 8 times 3 and 1/2. We're going to need to rewrite these. We're going to rewrite this as 8 over 1, and we need to multiply. We need to change this to an improper fraction. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7 over 2. And now when we multiply this, well, let's simplify here. Divide these both by 2. This becomes 1, and this becomes 4. 4 times 7 is 28 over 1. Where did I make my mistake? Okay, so I completely ignored the order of operations. I subtracted first instead of multiplying, so completely forget that F, and we need to start over with F. We need to multiply first. So we need to change this to an improper fraction. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5 over 2, times 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7 over 2. Now when we multiply that, we get 35 over 4. So 35 over 4. Let's simplify that. 4 goes into 35 8 times. That's 32. Minus and get 3. So 4 and 3, or I'm sorry, 8 and 3/4. So now we have to do 10 and 1/2 minus 8 and 3/4. These need to have common denominators, so 10 and 2/4 minus 8 and 3/4. We will need to borrow, so it becomes 9 and 6/4 minus 8 and 3/4, and we get 1 and 3/4. So the answer to, or F, is 8. 8 is F, 1 and 3/4.